Hey guys, I hope you enjoy this week's sermon. If you're interested in getting connected here more at the sanctuary, you can visit us at our website at tscwest.org, or you can check us out on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, all of the things. I hope you enjoy this message.
Last week, we got to hear from Pastor Derek, and that was just an amazing message in John 12, where we really just dove in about how Mary and Martha, where she sat at Jesus' feet and then anointed them with this pure nard perfume that was worth about a year's wage, and then used her hair to wipe his feet. And he tied that into like idols, and it really hit hard for me. And I thanked him afterwards because he just made some great connections on the things that we value more than just sitting at Jesus' feet, whether that's our job, our family, or what have you not. So if you have not seen that message, I would encourage you to go back and watch it, because today's going to tie in with that, because we're about to look at John 13. And what's interesting is in John 12, Mary washes Jesus' feet, but in John 13, what we're about to see is Jesus wash his disciples' feet. A lot of foot stuff going on. People are like, is there some weird foot fetishes in the Bible? No, we are going to get to the cultural context of it all. So with that being said, we like to stand just to honor the word for the reading of scriptures. We don't put it up on anymore. We want you to follow along, feel like you can have a Bible or a Bible app. We're going to be reading in the NIV version. If you need one in the back, there in the pew, we're going to be on page 507. That's 507. And we're going to be beginning in John 13, beginning in verse 1. And it goes like this. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water in a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who have had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said not everyone was clean. When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." This is God's word. You may be seated. So if you've been around the sanctuary for some short of time, you probably heard my testimony or heard me share little bits and pieces of my own personal story and how I ended up here and my background and whatnot. And you probably figured out a couple things. One, that I like Lord of the Rings. Two, that I like metal. Most of the pastors dress in black. We're all metalheads. That's just how we roll. And then I was military also. And so today we're going to have a lot of different military themes because we're dealing with service, serving others, and sacrifice. And so I just play to my strengths. So sorry. That's what we're going to go with. But one of the things that people have wrongly assumed about me is that when I joined the military, I was just like this gung-ho guy and did a lot of cool stuff and whatnot, and that I was always this good soldier, and that is not true. I was actually a very terrible soldier to begin with. I was really bad. In fact, I earned the nickname Hollywood as my call sign because I was such an idiot. And let me tell you, I want to tell you guys how I got that nickname, the Hollywood nickname. So prior for leaving to deployments to the Iraq and Afghan wars, you would often spend months training either in just fake war scenarios or mounted operations in urban terrain, which is you're going through fake scenarios where people are dressed up in Middle Eastern garb and they're speaking the language so you can get accustomed to it. Then you're clearing house to house. So you have a lot of this going on. And what's crazy is during those situations and scenarios, they're blowing everything up too. So there's like explosions going on. You have this stuff called simunition, which is basically like paintballs for your M4. So you like actually get to shoot each other with paintballs. So it's kind of fun, kind of crazy, but you're preparing for all of this. And so we had this fake war going on in the middle of training up to leave to go to Afghanistan. And in the middle of this training, I decided to take a phone call, and I'm not kidding you, to plan a fraternity party that I wasn't even gonna be at. I was like, you know what? Forget this training. I'm gonna plan a party that I'm not gonna be at and have everybody else come, and I'll be awesome. So around me, everything is blowing up, and I'm hiding in the corner of this room taking this phone call, and I'm like giving them instruction. I'm like, invite these people, do this, da-da-da-da-da, get this keg or whatever. And my team sergeant, Paul Gonzalez. Now, if you're unlucky enough to have the name Gonzalez in the military, your nickname will always be Gonzo. That's just what it's gonna be. It doesn't matter what else you do, you will be Gonzo. So he was forever Gonzo to all of us. And my team sergeant Gonzo, he sees this young punk kid on his phone in the middle of the war, not taking things seriously when we're about to deploy overseas, and his jaw drops. And then he just yells at me, and he's like, "Hey, Hollywood, turn off your freaking phone." And so at that point, I'm like, uh-oh. So I turn off the phone. I have the old Motorola flip razor thingy. And yeah, you guys know what I'm talking about. And after that event, I earned the nickname Hollywood because he went and he told everybody that I was the idiot who planned a frat party in the middle of training to go overseas. And everyone's like, oh, that's so Hollywood. So I earned the nickname Hollywood. Now, Gonzo is a behemoth of a man, and I'm just gonna show you how much bigger he is right up here. So that's him on the left. Look, you see me, he's a big dude. Just a big dude. And so we were actually overseas twice together. And the thing about Gonzo that mattered more than anything else was he was a fantastic leader. He never asked me to do anything that he himself wouldn't have done or already hadn't done. So he wasn't on his phone in the middle of planning preparations and going overseas. When we had to do very hard work and strenuous things like ruck marches where you literally put a pack with a metal frame that hurts your back and about 100 pounds in it and do like 20 miles, he'd be the first out front leading that. He always led from the front. And the thing that he didn't know is that I was really afraid. I was afraid to go overseas. And I just really didn't want anybody to find out. And so by the time that we got to Afghanistan, that fear really kicked in for me. And so I started to find out where I was going, and it was on the border with Pakistan, and there was all these little stars on the map, and they basically showed how many times they were getting attacked, people that were getting blown up, how they were dying. So it was a really bad place to go, and that's where we were going. And so I started to subversively try and get myself moved to a headquarters element so I could stay behind and like answer radios or something like that and stay safe. I wanted to stay safe, and that was my goal. And Gonzo heard about it. And so one day he pulls me aside and, I think I'm gonna get a real talking to. And he just looks at me and he says, Hollywood, I heard that you asked to stay behind. And I couldn't even look at him. We were sitting at this like broken down picnic bench, like in the middle of a desert. And finally he just says, hey, Hollywood, will you look at me for a second? And he goes, I want to let you know I'm afraid too. And he said, I'm afraid that, something can happen while we're out there and that I'm never going to see my wife and kids again. And he said, but I want to let you know, courage is doing the right thing even when you're afraid. And he said, tomorrow we're all going to get on that chopper and we're all going to be afraid together, but we're going to get through this together. So when I became a Christian, I started reading a lot about the life of Jesus. I would look for examples in everyday life of how his posture was emulated. And I often thought of Gonzo and just the way that he would lead. And it often reminded me of the way that Jesus would interact with his disciples, reassuring them, always leading by example. And the thing that you have to remember is that even Jesus admitted to his disciples when he was afraid. If you remember in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he was about to go to the cross, he reminded his disciples, I'm overcome to the point of death. We would not have these recorded scriptures had they not been there to tell his own disciples just about how afraid he was to go to the cross. And so he was willing to be completely vulnerable in that moment. But more than that, Jesus always led by example, and he always was showing his disciples the very things that they should do because he himself was doing it, which leads us to washing his disciples' feet. Now, there's a big difference between a leader and a boss. Bosses just tell you what to do, right? And a lot of people view God as a boss wrongly. They're like, just do this, do this. But Jesus, God in the flesh, is a leader because he leads from the front, and he's out front asking people to do the exact same thing. So, looking at this passage, in modernity, we think of feet washing in a very different manner. You've probably seen pictures of like the Pope washing people's feet during Holy Week on that Thursday that we call it Monday, Thursday, which comes from the Latin word, where we get our literally modern day word for mandate. It's a mandate to wash other people's feet. And so the Pope will often wash like prisoners' feet or other people, or it's a symbolic gesture a lot of times in the church. But by and large, the cultural context of the day is completely lost on most of us as far as what foot washing actually entailed. The thing is that these days we have these sweet kicks where everything's enclosed. We got our Nikes and our feet stay comfortable and the dirt's off of them. But during antiquity, they most often wore sandals. So they didn't have those closed-toed shoes. Now, I've been to the Middle East. Anybody else been to the Middle East? You know it's a dusty, dirty place, okay? And when it would rain, most people assume it's just all sand, but it's like this fine, we call it moon dust. It's almost like silt. You'd step on it and just be poof. But when it rained, it would turn into, or even just any little bit of water or condensation, it would turn into this thick sludge. Like I want to show you a picture of what my boots look like. That's what it's like in the Middle East when you're walking around in that environment. Your feet are caked in that disgustingness. So, what people's feet would look like in the area, since it very much matches that, you wouldn't want to walk into somebody's home like that, would you? It'd be like, our mudrooms here. It's like, take your shoes off or take your sandals off and wash your nasty feet. I don't want you tracking that stuff around in my house. But you have to remember that in antiquity, it was also an agrarian society. And if you've been to the Middle East, there's like a lot of trash in the road. So remember, they don't have a great sewage system or trash system. And then you have donkeys and horses on the road, and there's just feces all in it. So they're walking, and they're getting all of this on their feet. And you guys know, if you've ever stepped in dog poop and then unknowingly and then walked in your house, it's literally the worst, isn't it? You're like, where's that smell coming from? I know it's somewhere around here, and you've just tracked it all over the carpet, and you're like, now we got to nuke this house. So, when you would enter somebody's home, you would wash your feet. That was the first thing you do. You remove your sandals and wash your feet because you didn't want to track all that stuff in. But here's where the context is lost on us. It was usually the job of the house slave to wash feet. And here's what's interesting. The Jews would not allow other Jewish slaves and servants to wash Jewish feet. They found it so defiling and disgusting, they would only let the Gentile slaves do it. So, when Jesus removes his garment and wraps a towel around his waist, not only is he connecting it to a Gentile service, where he's wrapping the Gentiles into the faith, he starts to wash his disciples' feet, and you can now see why Peter gets so indignant. He knows that it's the job of a common slave to do. He's appalled and shocked that his rabbi, his teacher, would lower himself that low. And just like Derek spoke last week, imagine how shocked everybody in the room must have been when Mary used her hair to wash Jesus' feet. So, this is not just a symbolic gesture that we're getting. It's going to become this mandate that connects a lot of who Jesus is and his leadership styles and everything else to us in the church. But Peter, of course, as he does, misinterprets it. He's like, all right, cool, wash my body, Jesus. Like, Peter's a weird dude. You ever wonder if Jesus is just like chuckling and like, God, you say dumb stuff, man. But here's what's crazy. Even after he's done washing the disciples' feet, he has to explain it to them because they don't get it. They just don't get it. Now, you have to remember, this is right before the Passover festival. And the Passover festival is where we have the Last Supper, where they go to the upper room, they prepare the meal. And so Jesus is there. And in addition to the Last Supper, he washes their feet because that night he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane to pray, is ultimately arrested and betrayed. And so here's what's interesting. In Luke's 22's version of the Last Supper, when Jesus is in the upper room, it says this: a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was considered to be the greatest. So Jesus washes their feet and they're like, I'm the best. I want to be the best, Jesus. So not only do they not get it, they misinterpret it, and Jesus has to explain this significance. And the significance in the modern era has not changed. In the West, we look to power, influence, prestige, and those with influence are the ones that we most often look up to and want to emulate. Do we not? And here's how much that we've come to value influence and power and prestige in our modern day world. You can literally be an influencer as a job now, right? In fact, they did a poll and a survey of Gen Z. And do you know what the number one job that Gen Z wanted to have was? Influencer. You know by what percentage? 57% of Gen Z said, that's the job I want. I want to be an influencer. I want to influence people and have them adore me. But here's where Jesus flips the narrative on its head. He goes, if you want to become the greatest, then here's what you got to do. You got to lower yourself and wash feet. You got to become a slave to all. And if you follow that, then you will be blessed. Do you want to impact the world around you? Then take the role of a common slave and serve other people. His model is if I, the king of the universe, can lower myself that low, then you must too. And if you do it, not only will you be blessed, but I guarantee you'll bless other people. Amen. So I don't think I have to tell anybody, like, obviously it was kind of a no-brainer that we value power, prestige, money, influence, and security in the modern era. I think we all know that. I think it's a big reason as to why many outside the church dislike us, because they see us as, oh, they're only interested in power, whether that's in politics. Oh, they only care about themselves. Oh, they're mean, they're hypocritical, or whatever. Now, I think the sanctuary does a really good job at washing feet. I do. Yes. We have our homeless friends outside that we feed every single Sunday. We have our shower ministry. We have our Ragamuffin Cafe. We have a recovery ministry. These are beautiful and amazing things. But if we are doing them just to become great in our own eyes, then we have missed the point. And if we look at other churches and go, oh, look how awesome we're doing it and how they're not, we've missed it. We've missed it. We're no different than the disciples arguing about who's going to be the greatest just after they got their own feet washed. for me, I know that a lot of times I value influence and provision a lot in my life to a level that's unhealthy. God, take care of me, make me financially stable, take care of every need. And the thing is when I look at my life through that lens, I miss the very people around me that I can serve. Like, we've had a hellacious last 48 hours. My wife and I took my daughter skiing on Friday, and she broke her leg while she was skiing. And so we had to go down to the bottom of that mountain house ER, get it casted. And the whole time I wasn't thinking, oh God, thank God she's okay. I was thinking, how much is this gonna cost me? And I was beginning to trust in my own provision as opposed to God's provision.
Wow, that's good.
And then I missed the opportunity to be Jesus to the nurses and doctors in that room because I'm worried more about my needs. And not to say that my needs aren't important, but everything was gonna be fine. It was just a broken leg, but I'm sitting there catastrophizing, thinking about how I can get ahead. And a lot of times that will eventually translate into, how can I become the greatest? How can I take care of me? How can I take care of my needs? And Jesus goes, well, lower yourself, become a slave to all, and wash feet. Now, here I think the reason why this is so difficult for many of us to do is because somebody's always got to take a hit. Like, if you're going to sacrifice and lower yourself, somebody's got to take a hit in some way, shape, or form. Whether through service or sacrifice, you're going to have to take a hit in some way, shape, or form. And the sacrifice that's going to happen can usually be in the case of maybe it's you're sacrificing your pride or your ego, or for me, my provision, a job or a relationship. Maybe it's even your life that you got to take the hit for. That you got to be willing to put your life on the back burner for somebody else to find hope, healing, and to truly live. And that's what Jesus is ultimately going to show us by washing his disciples' feet. Jesus' love and humility towards his disciples and foot washing points to the ultimate act of love and sacrifice on the cross by dying in their place. He's showing them, this is the example. If I will lower myself enough to a slave to wash your feet, I'll also go to the cross and die in your stead. And I want you to be able to do the same. Now, when I was at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center in school at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, we had, physical training, and then we had classroom training. And a lot of times you're just dog tired when you get in there. I can't tell you the amount of no-dos I ate. Like I probably have heart problems from it, just so I could stay awake in the classroom environment. But to pump us up and to keep us awake, when we would enter the classroom, they would always tell us stories of Medal of Honor recipients. And I remember this one that they told me that was like literally so insane. I was like, there's no way this happened. But the dude ended up winning the Medal of Honor for it. And it was a Special Forces Master Sergeant named Roy Benavides. And Benavides was part of a Special Forces team in Vietnam. And one day he heard a radio distress call that a 12-man Special Forces team had been surrounded by a battalion of North Vietnamese soldiers. It was roughly 1,000. And they were on a reconnaissance mission, so they weren't supposed to be seen, captured, or caught, and they had secret documents with them as well. So he hears that they're under intense fire, they need help, and so get this. He hears the distress call, and he loads onto a helicopter of his own well-being, only armed with a knife. Now, when he gets there, the firepower is so intense, the pilot has to land 75 meters away, and Benavides has to jump 30 to 40 feet to the ground. And when he rushes forward, most of that Special Forces team is already dead or wounded. And while he rushes that 75 meters, he gets shot 3 times in the leg, the head, and his face. But he eventually reaches the team. And from there, he takes charge because everybody's in shock, everything's crazy, and he begins dragging the dead or wounded back to the helicopter and retrieving the classified documents. But he has to get back out there and run back another time. This is like a Forrest Gump scene, for real. Like he's the real life Forrest Gump. He runs back out. He gets shot multiple times again, retrieves the classified documents. And when he returns from securing the documents, the helicopter that had been waiting on him crashes. So the team is losing all hope. So he gets them in defensive positions again, and he spurs them on with the will to live and to fight. And so they begin to fight back against these overwhelming odds. And at that point, he begins to call in another flight, another aircraft to come get them out, while also directing tactical airstrikes so that he can get out on an extraction attempt. Now that right there alone is enough for me to be like, all right, you get the Medal of Honor. That you've sacrificed way more than enough. But it only gets crazier from here. So while he's administering first aid, the North Vietnamese sneak up to him, club him in the back of the head, and he has to fight this dude off hand to hand. And he gets stabbed while he's doing that. So once the helicopter finally lands, Benavides is the last man out to get on. Only after everybody has been collected does he allow himself to be collected on to that. Now, his wounds are so severe that when he arrives, the doctor's like, this dude's dead. And they put him in a body bag. They start to zip it up. He had to spit in their face to show him he was still alive. When all said and done, Benavides had 37 separate bullet, bayonet, and shrapnel wounds across his body. And rightfully so, he was awarded the Medal of Honor in 1981. The thing that I want to reflect on the story of Benavides is he didn't have to leave that base. He didn't have to rescue those men. Those men were in a situation of their own making, and he took the hit for them. He was willing to sacrifice his life so that other people could live. It wasn't Benavides' fault that those men were outnumbered and surrounded, and yet he takes the hit. And that, my friends, is exactly what Jesus does for us on the cross. He takes the hit for us. Amen. He takes the hit. He sacrificed. We, like those men who are surrounded, often will get ourselves into situations of our own making that lead to disastrous moments in our life, right? Whether it's through sin or addiction or poor life choices, the need for power, wealth, influence, provision, prestige, a relationship, an idol, something that takes power in our life, or any vice that we have, whether that's anger or indifference, we often will get ourselves surrounded in our own life circumstances and have a difficult time getting out. And we're the ones who've got to ourselves in the mess, and Jesus goes, do you understand what I'm showing you? Do you understand what I've done for you? If you're willing to make yourself less than a slave even, then I need you to take the hit as I have too for other people. I need you to sacrifice, and I need you to love them even when it's hard. Because that's what I'm showing you in washing your feet. That's what I'm showing you on the cross. And if you do this, then the world will know you're actually my disciples. And you'll be blessed if you do it. And that's the power of the gospel. And when you see it in action, it will radically change your life. I mean, it changed my life when I saw it in action. When I first became a Christian, I saw this exemplified by the lead pastor of the church that I was attending, a guy named John Burke. He's in Austin, Texas. And I just knew that I wanted to give back because things were happening in my life. So I started volunteering in the youth services. And they had this retreat, and they were asking if I would come along. And I was like, sure. Now, remind you, I am very new to the faith at this point. Like, I'm maybe like a month in or something. And I'm going on this overnight retreat. And so when I get there, I'm like, I don't know any better. Like, I've got like a t-shirt with like a naked chick on it, and all the boys are like, that's cool, you know? And I'm like, I don't know what the standards and morals are and everything else. And then when we get to our cabin, somehow a bat had gotten in there. And so it swoops down right at my face, and I just let off this long string of expletives where I'm like, holy beep, 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 beep. There's a beep, 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 you know, and there's just kids surrounding me. So of course, I had just gotten out of the military too, so I cursed like a sailor at the time. And so, Of course, it gets back to the parents. They're like, oh, there's some leader in there whose influence are your kids with like half-naked chicks on his t-shirt. He's swearing up a storm. I never heard about it because John took the hit for me. And his son was in my cabin, his own son. But that's because John understood the gospel and he knew that I was new to faith and I was growing. And so he took the hit and he was like, hey man, he's new. He'll grow out of it. He's a newbie Christian. He's wanting to put in the work. Let him serve. And not only that, sometimes I remember one time I was pulling into church and he was in a parking vest and he was directing traffic because they were short-staffed. Just the lead pastor of this church directing traffic. And that is a thankless job if you've ever been at a church where you like have to direct traffic. Like, dude, the volunteers would always be like, yeah, we get like flipped off like once a week. I've never understood that too. Gotta get to church. So true to form, John gets flipped off. And I just have to wonder how awkward that was because then he took off like the vest and had to go preach. And that person's probably sitting there like, uh-oh. But because John followed Jesus' example, it allowed me to follow the same example. Paul even mentions this, imitate me as I imitate Christ. And if I knew that if I was really going to do this Christianity thing, then there was going to be a cost because other people were showing me there was a cost. That they would be willing to take the hit for me. Would I be willing to take a hit for somebody else? And I would have to learn to wash other people's feet, even when it was hard and disgusting. And it couldn't be about my influence or prestige or getting on stage or gathering an audience or people thinking that I'm cool. Instead, it was about serving others so that they could find healing just as I was able to find healing in the midst of my very brokenness and my own battles. So I'm going to invite the band up, and we're going to close here with a couple just kind of reflection points and a challenge that I really have for you guys. Get us out of here early today. I think in a lot of ways it's easy to pick on the church in the West. Like it's super easy. Like we just see it on social media all the time. Christians suck. They're not humble. You know. They're hypocritical. And I think we do a really good job here, but if we pat ourselves on the back, like I said, we've really missed the point. And also I think there's like a lot of generational snobbery, like in the culture wars too. Like we're like, oh, boomers blew up the world. And Gen X is just, well, nobody cares about Gen X because they were raised on, hose water and neglect. I'm like Gen X Xennial, so I know what I was like. And then everybody's like, oh, and millennials and Gen Z, they're like lazy and entitled. There's like this snobbery that we do. We hear this talk, and even in the church, we hear it when it comes to like spiritual discipline or serving the church or tithing between the different generations. We'll be like, well, the older people tithe because they have money, but we don't, we're poor, and that's their fault. They blew up the world. In fact, I'm going to read something from an op-ed that's going to drive this point home. It goes like this. It says, today's youth are lazy. They're lazy in language and communication. We see that in text messages maybe. They don't seek hard work, nor do they have the endurance to see it through. They are not gritty, nor resolute, and they lack ambition. Now here's the twist. That quote right there, that's from a 1938 op-ed by the Chicago Tribune. The youth that author is talking about would go on to parachute behind enemy lines, storm beaches in Normandy and in the Pacific, and become known as the greatest generation. I think a lot of the world looks at Christians, and like the author from the Chicago Tribune, they say the same things about us. Lazy, not gritty, mean, hypocritical, they don't wash feet, they don't do this. We hear it all the time. But we in this room, we have an opportunity to become the greatest if we will become the least and wash feet. just as Jesus did. We have an opportunity to show the world a living and tangible Jesus when we follow his example. And here's the thing that we can never, ever, 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 ever forget in that moment of foot washing. Jesus also washes Judas's feet. And I think that's the part where we get scared. We go, well, what if somebody hurts me? What if somebody betrays me? But all relational risk requires sacrifice. You cannot guarantee the outcome. But what I can guarantee you is that you're following the way of Jesus. So the question that I want to posit to us today is, are we willing to do the same as Jesus in the room? Will we be willing to take the hit for other people so that they can find life, even when it's messy and dirty and they're caked in that mud? We have to remember there's always a mud underneath the masterpiece. If you found a Rembrandt painting out in the trash, an original one, would you just call it a wash? Say, oh, yeah, we'll leave it in the dumpster? Or would you take every single effort possible to gently remove the grime, to restore it to its original beauty? We must do the same with people. If we're willing to do this, here's my hope. I hope that if we just in this room do this and we begin to turn the tide in the West, where they go, man, these are people who wash feet, they take the hit and whatnot. I'm hoping that one day when we get to heaven, the saints will look at us and go, man, there goes the greatest generation. They turned the tide. Everybody said that they were lazy and mean and hypocritical, but instead they parachuted behind the proverbial enemy lines to love others, make themselves less. They are the greatest generation. I'm gonna pray and then we're just gonna reflect for a little while. If you need to pick up your children, please do. We're gonna have Derek or one of the other team members come up here and just kind of share a little bit about what we felt God was telling us during this time period before and pre-service prayer. And if you need prayer, please come up to the front. We're gonna have our prayer team in the front. So with that said, let me pray. Jesus, I thank you that you made yourself low. That you were lowborn and you continued to live a life of service to others. That you gave us an example on how to live. I pray that it would refine us. It would be a refining fire to see your example and go, I want to love others. I want to love them well. I'm willing to take the hit to Jesus because I want to follow you. Pray that the men and women in this room, that as they continue to live the life of Jesus, they will be known as great in your eyes, even if they are the least in the world's eyes. We thank you and we praise you for the work that you're doing in the men and women in this room. Let us learn that if we want to become the greatest, we must become the least and wash feet. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.